So welcome to this language lesson, and in this lesson we're just going to look at the structure having with the past participle. Now, grammar is important in your writing, and it is important that you use a range of structures. So this structure is something you could possibly use because it is more commonly found in writing than it is in speaking. Okay, make sure you've got a pen and paper with you. You might want to take some notes, and there is a short task for you to do at the end of this video. So we've got a sentence here. Having examined the patient, I prescribed him with amoxicillin. And just 3 questions for you to consider. If you want to pause the video, it won't take you too long. And just have a think about these 3 questions. Okay, to which time are you referring? Well, you're referring to the past time. It could be the recent past, or it could be something that happened a long time ago. But we use this structure when we're referring to the past. There are 2 clauses. You can see the first clause with having examined the patient. And then we've got a second clause, I prescribed him with amoxicillin. Which clause happened first? Well, the having clause happened first. And the second clause, I prescribed him with amoxicillin, this happened afterwards. Often the second clause happens as a consequence of the first clause. I prescribed him with amoxicillin because I examined him. And the 2 clauses are very closely related, as you can see. Here's another example. Having undergone strenuous exercise, the patient collapsed. So how we make this structure, this sentence, we use having and we use the past participle in the first clause. Just a quick reminder of what the past participle is. It's the 3rd verb form in English. And then in the second clause we use the subject, which is the patient, and we use the second verb form, which is the past simple. So that's the form we use when we use this sentence structure. And these 2 clauses are always separated by a comma. Really important not to forget the comma. As I said before, the having clause always happens first, and then the second clause with the past simple happens afterwards. And they're very closely related, these 2 clauses. The subject must be the same in both clauses. So you can see in the having clause, we don't actually state the subject. It's not until you read the second clause do you know who or what the subject is. In this example, you can see the subject is the patient. So having undergone strenuous exercise, I mean the patient. The patient underwent strenuous exercise, and then the patient collapsed. So you must have subject agreement. If you think about this sentence, having collapsed, I performed CPR. It doesn't actually make any sense because the subject is different. In the second clause it says I performed CPR. So the subject is I. But it doesn't make sense. You can't say having collapsed. You can't say then I collapsed and I performed CPR on myself. Really doesn't make sense. So you just got to be careful and make sure you have subject agreement in both clauses. The clauses can be changed as well. So you could say, having examined the patient, I made an immediate referral, or I've made an immediate referral having examined the patient. And it doesn't really matter. Even if you use the past simple first and say I made an immediate referral, it still means that the having clause happened first. And you always have your comma in place. Okay, we'll get a little bit more advanced now, and using passives with the having and past participle structure. Having examined the patient, I made an immediate referral. So we know that this sentence is perfectly fine. But we could actually turn the second clause into a passive. You can say an immediate referral was made. And The subject is still actually the same. An immediate referral was made by me. So actually this sentence works perfectly fine. And both these sentences are good. Having been examined, Mr. Smith then complained of chest pains. So you can see with the having clause now, we've turned that into a passive. And this sentence again, it works perfectly fine. It was Mr. Smith who was examined and Mr. Smith who complained of chest pains. The subject, you still have subject agreement and it sounds great. If you use an active sentence, you can see it doesn't work. Having examined Mr. Smith, he then complained of chest pains. So the subject is completely different. I was the one who examined Mr. Smith, but he was the one who complained of chest pains. So the active sentence doesn't actually work, and you'd have to use one of the clauses. You'd have to change one of the clauses into a passive for this sentence to be grammatically correct. Got to be careful as well. Having been vomited several times, an ambulance was called. It doesn't really make sense. What the student has done here is turned both these clauses into a passive, and it really doesn't make sense. If you had just said, having vomited several times last night, an ambulance called, perhaps that was okay. But it really doesn't make sense to say, having been vomited. It sounds like someone vomited you. So you've really got to be careful when you use these passives with having. Normally it's only one of the clauses that will be a passive structure. Okay, and just thinking about this example here, having hurt his knee, the patient stopped playing sport. That's perfectly fine. You've got an active sentence and it sounds great. And if you turn it into a passive, you can see it doesn't really work. Having hurt his knee, sport was stopped playing. And you can kind of just tell, it just doesn't really sound right. It doesn't sound natural. So you've got to be really careful when you are using passives with this having structure. It's not with every structure you can use it. Okay, so just a quick task for you to do. If you want to pause the video, it won't take you too long. Remember, with the having clause, we use the third verb form, the past participle. And with the second clause, where you have the subject, we use the past simple. Okay, see how you do with this exercise. Please go ahead and pause the video. Okay, so let's have a look at the answers. The first sentence, having undergone surgery, the patient, and the past simple, felt much better. In the second sentence, we move the two clauses about. His condition improved, and the past participle, having commenced treatment. Having broken his leg playing football, he was in need of surgery. And finally, this was kind of really tricky. If you had used an active sentence here and said, having prescribed aspirin, her temperature subsided, wouldn't really make sense. Subject doesn't agree. I prescribed aspirin, but it was her temperature that subsided, so you needed to use a passive. She was prescribed aspirin, and it was her temperature which subsided. Okay, so I hope that was of some use. You have got a handout which you can now download, and as you do your writing, see whether you can use this structure in your letters. Okay, thanks for watching.